Welcome to Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on an in-depth exploration of something really critical, a historic challenge facing the U.S. federal workforce. And specifically, we want to unpack how this massive upheaval is hitting essential immigration and international travel services right now.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. We're looking at this sudden, really large-scale departure. Tens of thousands of dedicated civil servants leaving their posts. And this fundamentally alters the government's capacity, its ability to deliver on its promises.
Right. It's not just about sort of abstract bureaucracy, is it? We're talking about the actual machinery, the gears that process visas, manage borders, facilitate global movement.
Exactly. And what's really striking here is the sheer speed of this change. This isn't just gradual attrition over years. It's a structural transformation happening fast. And that poses an immediate risk. It impacts you directly if you're planning to travel, or maybe waiting for a family member from overseas, or even if your business relies on, efficient international trade. We really need to connect this to the bigger picture. What happens when a government deliberately treats to downsize vital, complex departments this quickly?
Okay, let's start with the scale then. Just how big is this upheaval? The core data, well, it reveals what many are calling historic mass resignations. We're talking well over 100,000 federal employees either resigning or, actively preparing to leave their jobs across many different agencies.
Yeah, over 100,000. And it's important to understand this exodus isn't exactly organic. It's largely tied to the Trump administration's stated goal of achieving a leaner government. The mechanism driving this specific wave, it's a program called deferred resignation, and that's coupled with accompanying agency-wide layoffs.
Deferred resignation. Can you explain that a bit for listeners? How does that work?
Sure. Basically, it incentivizes certain employees to agree now to resign at a later date. Often, they get specific severance benefits or maybe early retirement options in return. What it does is accelerate the timeline for departures. It creates these sudden, quite deep staffing vacuums in agencies.
Okay, got it. And this deliberate push, this drive for a leaner government, it's obviously generated huge arguments, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. On one side, the administration argues downsizing is necessary, cut operational costs, reduce waste, and ultimately create a more efficient, more agile government system. That's the big
efficiency, okay.
But the counter-argument, and you hear this a lot from critics, it focuses entirely on institutional knowledge, on memory. They warn that hollowing out the career civil service like this risks weakening democratic institutions and, crucially, diminishing America's global credibility. Think about it. When you lose a senior official who's handled complex trade talks for, say, 20 years, you don't just lose a person, you lose all that experience, that network, that specific knowledge.
That distinction is vital, isn't it? Efficiency savings versus losing actual capability. But I have a question here. If people are voluntarily choosing this deferred resignation program, doesn't that kind of undermine the critics' argument that the government is being hollowed out against its will?
That's a fair point to raise. But you have to look at the climate these decisions are made in. Many career civil servants are facing huge uncertainty. Potential transfers they don't want, or maybe a restructuring they fundamentally disagree with. So the deferred resignation program might look like a safer bet financially than just waiting around for a potentially disruptive mandatory layoff.
Okay, so it's voluntary, but maybe under pressure.
Exactly. Whether the departure is technically voluntary or forced, the end result for the agency is the same. The expertise walks out the door. And this immediately raises a fundamental question. Can a government designed to serve, 330 million people, many highly mobile, still deliver complex services like visa processing when it loses this staggering volume of specialist staff? The workload doesn't shrink, right? Only the capacity to handle it does.
And that complexity really comes into sharp focus when we look specifically at immigration, because it's not just one single system, is it?
Precisely. It's a network of agencies. And within this area, we actually find one major exception to all the pressure. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. That's the agency handling green card applications, naturalization, work permits. And what's fascinating, really key here, is its funding structure.
How so? What's different about USCIS funding?
Well, unlike most federal agencies that rely on Congress for annual appropriations, USCIS is funded primarily by the fees it collects. The application fees you pay for a specific process. That insulation is a huge factor. Because its budget is generally stable and self-sustaining through these user fees, USCIS is relatively protected from this immediate wave of government downsizing.
Okay, so that's a crucial takeaway. If you're listening and maybe worried about, say, your spouse's green card application, the practical point is that USCIS processing, well, it might not be lightning fast, but it should largely keep moving forward because the money's still there.
Exactly right. The fee-funded parts of the government are, for the most part, shielded from these specific cuts. So our deep dive really needs to focus on the more politically vulnerable areas, those agencies that do rely heavily on appropriations, the ones dependent on those annual, often politically charged budgets set by Congress. These are the agencies facing the immediate staff cuts and potentially serious backlogs.
And probably the most visible of those, certainly for travelers, is the State Department. They handle all the visa and passport services. And reports suggest this department has been hit hard, resulting in the layoff or departure of many seasoned career officials, particularly in its consular affairs division.
That's right. And the specific consequence we can track here really boils down to one word: backlogs, visa interviews, passport issuance. Expect delays. Visa adjudication especially requires a lot of nuance. A consular officer has to quickly assess intent, financial stability, potential risks, all based on foreign policy guidelines that are constantly shifting.
Right, it's not just stamping papers.
Not at all. And when experienced officers leave and are maybe replaced by newer staff or not replaced at all, you don't just get slower processing, you risk policy errors. That could lead to lengthy rejections or delays that are incredibly difficult to challenge or overturn later.
So for you, the traveler or the international business person, this translates pretty directly. Expect longer waits for visa interviews, longer waits for the actual passport book, and this directly hurts international students needing to get to class, business travelers needing urgent access to markets, and of course, families just trying to reunite in a timely way.
Then we shift gears slightly to the security and border side of things. Let's look at Customs and Border Protection, CBP. Now, the good news, relatively speaking, is that the uniformed CBP officers you see at airports and land borders, they're considered essential personnel. So they remain on duty. The borders stay open and functional.
Okay, so the frontline officers are there. But there's always a but, isn't there? Where do the cuts show up within CBP that still manage to slow everything down?
Yeah, the but is in the support structure. The cuts hit the support and policy rolls hard. We're talking about the staff who handle logistics, scheduling shifts, who manage the complex IT systems that officers rely on, or the people processing cargo pre-clearances, updating the policy manuals that thousands of agents use every day. Cuts here mean that while the gates are technically open, the administrative throughput, the actual speed at which people and goods can move, especially during peak travel times, could slow way down.
Ah, I see. So it causes knock-on effects, bottlenecks further down the line.
Exactly. It's like keeping the highway lanes open but removing the automated toll collection. Traffic still moves, but much, much slower.
And do we see a similar pattern with immigration and customs enforcement, ICE?
We do see a parallel issue, yes. Enforcement operations themselves, the field operations, they usually continue because they're often highly prioritized and centralized. But the loss of vital clerical, legal, and administrative support staff, that creates systemic bottlenecks, particularly in the immigration courts and administrative review processes.
How does losing clerical staff clog up courts? That seems indirect.
That sounds minor, but it's crucial. These are the people handling the chain of custody for evidence, making sure documents are filed correctly and on time with the courts, managing the complex dockets and calendars. If you lose the staff responsible for filing motions accurately, preparing case files, scheduling hearings, the whole judicial review system gets clogged. Cases stall before they even reach a judge. For individuals, especially those not detained, this means potentially years added to the administrative review process, delaying final resolution for thousands.
Wow. And finally, the humanitarian pathways, asylum and refugee processing. These systems are already under immense strain even before this upheaval.
Absolutely. And these areas are perhaps the hardest hit by the loss of institutional memory we talked about earlier. Asylum cases are incredibly complex. They require specialized training in international law, human rights conditions, interviewing techniques. Losing experienced adjudicators and the essential support personnel who prepare these difficult cases means these already long queues face further, potentially severe delays.
When that specific expertise walks out the door, the integrity and the speed of our humanitarian commitments suffer immediately.
Okay, so we've seen the impact on specific agencies and processes. Let's step back now. What does this massive administrative slowdown mean for the wider U.S. economy? And maybe its global standing? These staffing shortages must create broader economic ripples.
They certainly do. The connections might not always be obvious, but they're significant.
Take the travel and tourism sector first. That seems like a direct hit. Delays in getting visas. That is the throttle inbound international travel, right? Absolute direct. If potential tourists or business travelers can't get their visas in a predictable time frame, they simply won't come. They don't buy plane tickets, they don't book hotel rooms, they don't spend money in restaurants and shops. This translates almost instantly into measurable revenue losses for airlines, the entire hospitality industry, and especially for tourism-dependent states. Think Florida, California, New York, places that rely heavily on international visitors and their spending.
Makes sense. And beyond tourism, what about trade?
Yeah, look at international trade and tariffs. When you have reduced staffing at the agencies responsible for monitoring tariffs, ensuring customs compliance, inspecting imports, you introduce vulnerability and delay into the supply chain. If cargo inspections slow down at the ports, or if the expertise needed to manage, say, new or complex tariff policies isn't there, businesses see delays. This can disrupt just-in-time manufacturing, raise costs for imported goods, everything from electronics to clothes.
So it's not just people waiting longer, it's goods potentially waiting longer too, affecting prices.
Precisely. And the disruption doesn't just stop at physical goods coming in, it also hits the financial architecture.
How so? Where does finance come into this?
Well, here's where the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, gets involved. The IRS is already, let's say, famously stretched thin, especially when dealing with complex international filings. These federal workforce cuts risk disrupting their ability to process tax filings for immigrants and foreign nationals who need what's called an Individual Taxpayer Identification Number, or ITN.
An ITAN. Right, that's for people who don't have a social security number but still need to pay U.S. taxes.
Exactly. Certain foreign investors, students, others who have U.S.-sourced income but aren't eligible for an SSN. An ITN is essential for them to comply with tax law. If ITN processing slows down significantly, you're slowing down tax compliance itself. And crucially, you're also slowing down refund issuance for potentially thousands of non-citizens who are operating legally within the U.S. economy.
It really underscores how these administrative functions are like these invisible gears driving parts of the economy. When you remove the people maintaining those gears, the whole engine doesn't necessarily break down instantly, but it definitely slows. It grinds, affecting everything from global trade flows right down to local tax processing.
That's a good way to put it. The gears slow down. So despite this atmosphere of turmoil surrounding the federal workforce cuts, it's really essential for you, the person interacting with these systems, to understand the practical realities on the ground right now.
Okay, let's summarize the key takeaways then. What does the listener absolutely need to know?
All right, here's the essential knowledge to keep in mind. First, remember USCIS. It remains open and processing applications. That's because it's stable, fee-funded structure. Green cards, work permits, naturalization, those processes should continue, broadly speaking. Second, visa and passport applicants through the State Department must absolutely brace for significantly longer wait times. Be prepared for potential appointment rescheduling. Plan way ahead if you can.
Plan ahead. Good advice.
Yeah.
What else?
Third, border operations CBP at the ports of entry remain functional at the primary checkpoints. The officers are there. But expect slower throughput, longer lines, especially during peak travel periods. That's due to the loss of that crucial administrative and support staff behind the scenes.
Okay. Functional, but slower.
And finally, a point of uncertainty, maybe hope. Remember that this situation is still fluid. There are ongoing court challenges to many of the layoff decisions and program changes. The success or failure of those legal challenges could shift the entire timeline for when these backlogs might become most severe. So things could potentially change down the road.
Right. It's not necessarily a fixed outcome yet. Okay, so to briefly synthesize everything we've discussed today, we've really dug into the profound consequences of this historic federal workforce upheaval, driven largely by these downsizing efforts. We've detailed the specific immediate impacts on visa processing times, on border throughput, and how that connects to related economic sectors like trade and tourism. And we've highlighted this really precarious balance, haven't we, between trying to achieve budget efficiency and actually maintaining the vital functions of government services that people rely on.
It's a delicate balance, absolutely.
The coming months, well, they'll undeniably be a critical test of resilience for all of these agencies. And it forces us, I think, to ask a crucial final question. At what point does this policy push to be lean actually cross the line into becoming hollowed out, undermining America's fundamental ability to deliver on its promises, both here at home and globally? Something to think about.
All the best, and we will meet again with another important matter again.